If you're looking for a new practical EV that won't break the bank, is relatively easy to park, and still has decent range, you don't have as many options as you used to, now that the Chevy Bolt and Bolt EV are riding off into the sunset. But Hyundai has not given up on this segment. For 2024, we're getting an all-new Kona EV with even more range than before, 2 different battery packs, and it's in a bigger package. Even though it's still easy to park, it has a lot more room on the inside, something that some folks complained about last time. And in case you're wondering, yep, the charge port is still up front, which is definitely my preference if you live in a fair weather state. If you want to know more about the gasoline version of the Kona, I have a separate video on that. And if you want my detailed thoughts on the electric Kona, that's a future video, because unfortunately I've only had about 20 minutes with this pre-production model right here. Let's talk about the front end design. Clearly they have borrowed some elements from the Ioniq 5, but interestingly for this generation of Kona, gasoline Kona included, they designed it first as an electric vehicle and then adapted it to the gasoline vehicle as far as the design and actually the engineering of the entire chassis as well. And I think it really shows. The lines up front are very clean, very aerodynamic, and very futuristic. We again have the multi-module pixel theme all over like we find in the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6 with the various little pixels up there in that bar. And then down here at the bottom, we find chrome dots in the grille, again mimicking that pixel theme. We have full LED headlights over here, multi-modules with LED turn signals. As I said before, the charge door is up front. I actually like having a charge door right in the front of the vehicle. It makes it very easy to nose into charging spots. Obvious downside, of course, is that if you're an fender bender, you've bopped your charge door against something. That could be a bit of a bummer, but again, I find that pretty convenient. Now on the charging side, yes, it still uses CCS. Hyundai and Kia have not announced any sort of NACS support, but obviously you will be able to use an NACS to CCS adapter on this vehicle at charging stations where that is supported. Whether or not that is a Tesla station, we just don't know what the future holds. Moving around to the side, I'd call the general theme boxy but rounded. You can see that we have a fairly blunt front end, but they've rounded off the corners here and there. We have the same sort of Z pattern in the sheet metal on the side that we find in the Ioniq 5, definitely making this look like a member of the family. But the biggest thing you'll notice is that it's bigger. 171.3 inches long. That's about 6 inches longer than the old Kona. And almost all of that goes to either the cargo area or the back seats. We find more than 3 inches of legroom versus the old Kona. So significantly roomier on the inside than the Bolt and the Bolt EV. And we find about 25 cubic feet of cargo capacity in the back. Interestingly enough, Hyundai decided to design this platform sort of 2 ways. I'm sure some folks are going to dismiss the Kona as simply an EV conversion, but when you really look under the skin, that is not the case. The front suspension and front crash structures are common with the gasoline version, but basically everything structurally after that is unique for the electric vehicle, because this does have a skateboard-style battery pack in the rear. It also has no transmission tunnel in the back, completely flat floor, just as you'd expect in an EV. And then back here in the rear, some of the stamping is shared with the gasoline version, and there's a distinct advantage to that. A, the cargo area is large, and B, there's a surprise under the load floor. But before we get to that, let's finish talking about the styling. Again, we have design cues borrowed from the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6, but wrapped in a more organic and rounded wrapper. You can see, especially from this angle, that the sheet metal really curves all the way around the Kona, but then it has these sharp lines that intersect it, giving it a different flavor. We have the multi-module pixels going on here in this strong light bar that connects one side to the other. These might look like LED pixels, but these are just reflectors down here at the bottom of the bumper. We do have some shiny black plastic. I would worry about that scratching as you're getting cargo in and out of the hatch. But then we have full LED taillight modules on each side, including LED amber turn signals. That's certainly my preference. We have a power hatch in this model, and the load floor height has been reduced versus the last Kona, so it's going to be a little bit easier to get that cargo in and out of the trunk. In addition to the cargo area in the back, there's also a small pizza box style cargo area under the hood. Interestingly, it is a little bit bigger than the one that we see in the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6, likely because of the boxier proportions up front. Under here we find the single voltage EVSE. It's a 120 volt EVSE with a reasonable cord length right there. And we find the vehicle to load connector. This is basically the same one that works with the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6. You plug it into the J1772 port up front, then you have access to a 15 amp 120 volt outlet. That's a really handy touch. In addition to those changes, we also have a faster onboard charger than before. It now uses the 10.8 kilowatt charger, so you could take this battery from 0 to completely full in about 6 hours. That is significantly faster than the outgoing model. DC fast charging, it's a little bit faster than before, about 43 minutes from 10% to 80% versus 47 minutes for the outgoing Kona. The other big change, they're actually going to be two different battery packs. The biggest one will give you 261 miles of range. The smallest should give you around 200 miles of range. There is another payback though. The big battery model is the only one that's going to give you 201 horsepower. If you get the small battery pack, then that power figure drops down to 133. Torque is the same at 188, but you get a whole lot less horsepower because the battery pack is smaller and it just can't deliver as much oomph as the bigger battery pack. I am truly intrigued that Hyundai is giving us that small battery pack because it could be considerably less expensive than some of the competition that is now sailing off into the sunset. Although it's worth noting that we don't have exact pricing for the Kona Electric yet, especially that base battery pack. Since I don't have a great deal of time with the Kona Electric, let's just take a quick look around the interior and the seats. You can see they are basically the same seats that we find in the rest of the Kona lineup. In this model, we have two-way driver adjustable lumbar support, multi-way power driver's seat right there. Everything is pretty comfy. You'll notice that the front part of the structure of the vehicle is not different from the gasoline model. So we get the same sort of storage areas in the middle that we find in the gas model. It's actually pretty large and practical versus the average subcompact vehicle. But if I move to the back, where we have a whole lot of stuff hanging out here, you'll notice that the entire rear floor pan of the vehicle has been redesigned. And that gives us air vents in the back, that completely flat floor to help improve comfort for a center passenger in the rear. We have some USB charge ports in there. I do like the fact that we have those rear seat air vents, something that we don't find in a lot of subcompact crossovers, whether they're electric or not. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks. You can see that there is still some room back there. We have about the same amount of room that we found in the Chevy Bolt with slightly different dimensions back here as far as the combined legroom goes. So I find these seats to be a little bit more comfortable, especially when it comes to sitting in the middle. Here you can see I still have about an inch of headroom left thanks to the relatively high roofline. The electric model does not get the big panoramic moonroof you find in the gasoline version, but there is still a moonroof that opens and of course has a shutter that closes. As far as legroom goes back here, you can see that this knee is touching the seat back with this seat back all the way back in its tracks, but if I scoot over to behind the driver's seat where this is comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can still see that I have maybe about 2-3 inches of legroom left. As you'd expect from Hyundai, the front seats are both heated and ventilated. You can see more of that pixel theme going on in that center perforated section of the seat. We have some hard plastics mixed with some soft plastics on the front door panels. The main touch points are soft, like this lighter gray midsection and the armrest, but the rest of the door is made from a hard plastic. The dashboard design, that's basically the same as the regular gasoline Kona. So we have a storage slot right there. There's a very horizontal theme to the air vents and that trim piece. Pretty decently sized glove compartment below that. You probably could fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And speaking of tablets, there are two big ones on the dashboard. Twin 12.3-inch LCDs. I'm actually surprised that Hyundai went with the 12-inch design for this screen rather than the 10 or 11-inch displays they have in some of their smaller vehicles. I think that's because the interior of the Kona is notably wider than before, definitely wider than something like the Chevy Bolt, and that really gives the interior a different feel, much more of a big car vibe than a small car vibe, which is certainly what we had in the last Kona. This screen is going to support wireless CarPlay a little bit later this year. Unfortunately, the software update is not available. They say that's going to be offered via an over-the-air update. The entire system is over-the-air updatable. I didn't have the time or the cable to plug in Apple CarPlay, but we can explore some of the new EV screens. You can see that they've redesigned some of these screens to give us a bit better information about where the electricity is going. You can see the total consumption there, etc. You get some charging screens, some setting screens for things like the utility mode, smart regeneration, charging started, voice alert, whether or not you want plug-in charge to be on and enabled. You can see the plug-in charge ID right there. That allows you to plug the vehicle in and have it automatically recognized by the charging system. I do like the fact that they've continually improved some of these displays in the EV model. Now down from there, we have the same sort of controls that we find in the rest of the Kona lineup. Lots of physical buttons. So if you're a fan of that, you'll definitely like this. Automatic climate control for 2 zones. Down here we have the USB inputs for the system, so this one changes between a charge only and a USB interface port. That one's always charge only. Qi wireless charging mat there. Some additional buttons down here, auto brake hold, heated and ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, the drive mode toggle. I love the fact that we have heated and ventilated seats and the heated steering wheel, something that you don't find in all the small vehicles. Borrowed out of the Ioniq 5 is this column shifter. It's a little bit difficult to see. It's kind of hiding right there behind the steering wheel. Drive is forward, reverse is back there. park is at the end. That clears up a lot of space in this center console. So even though this is not a floating console design like we find in many EVs, there's definitely a lot of room in here. And these cup holders are some that we've seen in other Hyundai models where that little cup holder section pops out and then you can stow it away if you want to put larger items inside. You can see lots of storage space behind that. This center armrest opens to reveal pretty deep and large storage area. In addition to Hyundai's smart key functionality where you can use your phone as a key, we have an actual Hyundai key, but honestly, this one looks kind of old school to me. And I did notice that one of the other Konas that I was in earlier, the key had already been a little bit scratched up. You can see that we have the smart park system that we've seen in other Hyundais before, so you can actually remotely go forward and backward in the parking space, and then the rest of the buttons are right there. It has a Hyundai logo if you're wondering what that shape is all about. The steering wheel, it's a round 3-spoke design. You'll find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system over here on the left side, infotainment buttons over here on the right side, and the same sort of regeneration panels that you find in the Ioniq 5 behind the steering wheel with essentially the same software programming. So you can go from just coasting to more of an aggressive one-pedal drive mode. I love the variability and adjustability you get with these paddles. Turn signal, stalk, and headlight controls are over there on that side. These are not the production plastics, so don't worry too much about the way that looks. And then we also get a different style to the instrument cluster here. The redesigned instrument cluster software is also going to be found in the gasoline Kona. There are a few different styles for this layout. It's not quite as adjustable as some, but I do kind of like this more simple layout where we just have a very flat bar that rolls around. A lot of the size increase versus the last generation Kona went right back here to the cargo area. This is now just under 26 cubic feet of storage space, and under the floor, it is exactly the same as the gasoline Kona, which actually means since we don't have a spare tire in this model, you get a little bit more real-world space because all we have is this tire mobility kit in here. The other interesting twist is that if you wanted to put a temporary spare tire in your Kona EV, you could, because we still have the spare tire well and the spare tire mounting point. This could be one of the very few EVs in North America that actually has a place to bolt a spare tire. Outside of the pickup trucks or the Rivian R1S, you don't really have too many options. This load floor goes in 2 different stages, so you can lower it down there to put extra cargo in the vehicle, still giving you a lot of cargo room down there. Rather unfortunately, you cannot put this hard cargo cover under the load floor. It just doesn't fit. But Hyundai does allow you to latch it into place just behind the rear seat backs. That's not quite as practical as being able to put it under the floor, but it's probably the next best thing. Let's take a closer look at that spare tire area because again, this is what really intrigues me. You'll notice we still have the threaded mounting point. It is shaped exactly the same as the gasoline model. So again, you could definitely put a spare tire back here if you wanted to. As we get the Kona EV out on the road and off this grassy knoll, again, remember, we don't have all-wheel drive. So if you want all-wheel drive, you're gonna need to look at the Ioniq 5 or of course the Ioniq 6, but they're gonna cost you more. Or you could take a look at something like the upcoming Volvo EX30, which oddly enough is gonna be a competitor to this Kona EV because according to Volvo, don't know if I believe them just yet, but according to Volvo, it's going to start around $35,000. It's going to be built in China, not South Korea, so still won't qualify for the federal tax credit, but there is going to be a dual motor version that's going to give you pretty peppy performance. They're actually saying it's going to be the fastest Volvo in the lineup, even though it is going to be that $35,000 price point. Now, we don't know whether that $35,000 price point is going to be for the dual motor version or a single motor version. Some details are a little bit sketchy as of the day that I am driving this Kona EV. But let's get this out on the road. Obviously, we need to test the torque first. Well, Hyundai actually rolls on the torque a little bit slower than I had expected. The last generation Kona EV sometimes felt like a GTI in a way, so let's try it from a start. Oh, I'm in snow mode, so let's go ahead and correct that. Let's go ahead and put this in sport mode and see what happens. Okay, so sport mode. Oh, definitely more aggressive at the power ramp up. But we don't get full power until about 45 miles an hour. And that's probably why this is going to go 0 to 60 around 6.5 seconds would be my estimate right at the moment. It probably could go a little bit quicker if they decided to ramp power a little bit more rapidly, but that's the problem with front-wheel drive vehicles and a lot of torque, is you just can't do that without spinning the tires and shredding them. When turning left or right, you will definitely notice some wheel scrabble though, and you will definitely notice a little bit of torque steer. This is not only going to be the fastest Kona, it could be the most fun depending on exactly what you're looking for. Again, I haven't been able to spend too much time in the Kona EV, but in my limited amount of time out here, I did notice I like the handling in this a little bit better. It has a very stable and planted feel, thanks to that battery pack being mounted, of course, really, really low in the Kona Electric. This also has a little bit less ground clearance than the all-wheel drive Kona. The regular all-wheel drive Kona actually has over 8 inches of ground clearance. It's one of the taller entries in the segment, and the electric model, it is a little bit closer to the ground, so it's certainly going to have a different feel. One thing that did surprise me, however, is that the gasoline Kona actually appears to be a little bit quieter out on the road. I've asked Hyundai about that. They didn't really have a direct answer about why that might be, but I know that in this generation gasoline Kona, they spent a great deal of time trying to reduce road noise in the cabin with new tires and new sound deadening techniques on the inside of the vehicle, new bushings, etc. And I'm not sure if all of those apply to the electric Kona. It's tricky to talk about efficiency because, of course, I haven't been driving this on a predictable drive route, but it does appear that about 4 miles per kilowatt hour is possible if you're treating it gently and going at relatively steady speeds. I do like the fact that we have not only the one-pedal driving mode, which some people love, but we also have an auto mode and we have a coasting mode. Coasting mode is just as it sounds. It doesn't do any sort of regenerative braking until you put your foot on the brake pedal. Then it's going to do regeneration back into the battery and it's going to blend in the friction brakes. Auto mode is interesting, and we see this in the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6. It's going to balance the regeneration out based on traffic conditions. So right now, it's going to coast. But as we come up on the traffic ahead of us, if I let my foot off the brake pedal, it's actually going to start putting more regeneration as we get closer and closer to that vehicle, which is going to help slow you down. It's really started to ramp that regeneration up. My foot's not on the brake pedal. I like this predictive nature, and this is something that we find in a few other luxury vehicles, but it's excellent to see in a vehicle like the Kona. If you are comparing this to the Chevy Bolt, it just has a single paddle on the steering wheel, and I never found that quite as useful as the auto system or the adjustable paddles that we find on Hyundai's electric models. Now, one thing you will find on the Bolt EUV that you won't find on the Kona is a hands-free driving system. We do have the HDA2 system, their Highway Driving Assist 2 button over here on the steering wheel, but this is a hands-on-the-wheel system. It's not a hands-off-the-wheel autonomous driving system. If you're interested in a Hyundai with a hands-off-the-wheel driving system, you probably don't have too long to wait, because the Hyundai Kia group of companies is going to debut that system first in certain versions of the upcoming EV9. Then, logically, it's going to be in the Ioniq lineup, and at some point it may filter down to other models in the lineup. But at this point in time, we don't have that kind of system in the Kona EV. For the moment, at least, if you're looking for the most fun Kona, I would suggest taking a look at the Kona EV. It's also, of course, going to be the one that's never going to need to visit the gas station, might be a little bit less expensive to operate, and depending on your situation, may or may not get things like carpool lane access, additional state and local incentives, utility incentives, and if you lease one, you probably will get that tax credit, or if you're a business and you're buying one, you're going to get the tax credit anyway. So the Kona EV might even be the less expensive Kona, depending on your particular situation. Be sure and sound off in the comment section. Let me know what you think of the new Kona EV. From this angle especially, I'm getting a little bit of modern Genesis vibes, perhaps a little bit of GV60 in the rounded shapes and the overall profile. Let me know if I'm crazy. The one big thing we don't know about the Kona Electric is its price tag, and there are some wild estimates out there. Some folks think this is going to start around $35,000. Some folks have said it's going to be under $30,000. My guess is it's going to be between $30,000 and $35,000. I don't expect it, even with the small battery pack, to get as inexpensive as the Chevy Bolt currently is. So if you really want a really inexpensive EV, you might want to run out and get that Chevy Bolt now. Also, if you want the tax credit, this is not going to get it because it is going to be manufactured in South Korea. And until those rules change, purchases won't qualify for any special tax treatment. However, if you lease one, then you will get the tax credit effectively on the Kona, as long as Hyundai is passing that on in their lease programs. So far they have been. Definite reasons to get the Kona over the Bolt lineup are the more accommodating cargo area, the bigger back seat, much bigger back seat, the bigger cabin, generally speaking. The cabin is much wider in the Kona. It's not just an optical illusion back here. This is indeed wider than the Bolt and the Bolt EUV. Also, the technology on the inside. I like the two-screen setup in the dashboard. That is fantastic. The interior is well laid out for an electric vehicle. We get that flat floor in the back. That's a nice touch as well. We finally have wireless CarPlay with the factory navigation infotainment system in the dashboard also. Fast charge speeds are still not going to be a Kona thing. This is the kind of vehicle you could definitely take on a road trip if you wanted to. 261 miles of range is nothing to sneeze at, but it does mean that at around 10% battery, you're going to have to spend 43 minutes or so at the DC fast charge station to get back to 80% state of charge, which will give you approximately 200 miles or so of range as long as you're treating it gently. If you want that faster DC fast charging experience, you're going to have to spend more and go up to the Ioniq 5. Some folks are going to be offended by that, but it makes perfect sense. The mission of the Kona EV is to be a less expensive EV, more accessible EV than the Ioniq 5. And if they had given this the Ioniq 5's battery pack and motor setup, yeah, maybe it could have charged faster and it could have been more efficient, but it also would have been considerably more expensive, and that's not the mission of the Kona. Likewise, if you want all-wheel drive, you're going to have to look elsewhere because the Kona is front motor only. Yes, the back end of this platform was dedicated EV in terms of its design with that flat floor, etc., but no electric motor in the back. The counterpoint to that is that if you want an EV that is a solid commuter vehicle and has room for a spare tire, this is strangely one of the very few. The last EV that I drove that had a spare tire that wasn't a pickup truck or a big SUV is actually the Audi Q8 e-tron, so this is in pretty good company, and you don't need one of those funky space saver spares. All you have to do is go down to the Hyundai dealer, order a spare tire for a regular Kona and the jack kit, then you just jam it in the trunk and you have, bingo, EV with a spare tire. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. And are you interested in the Kona? Do you think Hyundai will build enough of them? That's the other question. How many will Hyundai build? How many will they bother to import to the US? Hopefully it's a reasonable number because I think this is a very solid entry-level EV. And this is the kind of EV that more folks should be open to, because if you don't really need 300 miles of range each day, if you don't really need to DC fast charge in 18 minutes, you can save some cash, be willing to spend about 20 minutes at that DC fast charger extra on a long road trip, and you will be just fine in the Kona. Let me know what you think about that, and I'll see all of you next week.